The kingdom of Eltheria lay under a sky that never fully brightened. Even at noon, the sun barely pierced the clouds, casting the lands in a muted gray glow. Mist rolled over the hills like a living thing, curling into the ancient forests and sweeping across the stone walls of the royal palace. Within the palace, whispers of old curses threaded through the corridors, and every shadow seemed to conceal a secret. Beneath the grand hall of the palace, hidden from every eye, a woman lay buried. She was not dead, nor fully alive in the sense the world understood. Magic, old and relentless, held her in a suspended state. She could feel the weight of the earth pressing down on her chest, and the cold stone walls that enclosed her were both prison and cradle. Her mind, however, was awake. Memories flickered like dim candlelight, snatches of a past she barely understood, faces she could not name, voices she had almost forgotten, and a sense of betrayal too sharp to ignore. She had been someone powerful once. She had commanded, had led, had loved. And yet, here she was, trapped beneath the palace, a prisoner of old curses and hidden fears. She had names whispered to her by shadows, though none were real. She clung to these names as one clings to driftwood in storm-tossed seas. Her senses, dulled by the darkness, sharpened in strange ways. She could feel vibrations through the stone. She could hear the faintest creak of the castle above. She could sense approaching footsteps, though they were distant. And then, she felt it an instinctual pull, like a warm current reaching through the cold stone. A presence, vast and undeniable, moving with a certainty that belonged to a king. Not a king by title alone, but a man whose soul carried the weight of his kingdom, whose heart beat in rhythm with its fate. Above her, in the grand hall, the Alpha King of Eltheria strode. He was a man both feared and revered. His armor was dark, etched with the runes of ancestors long gone. His eyes, sharp and amber-bright, missed nothing. He carried himself like a predator who knew every corner of his territory. Yet there was a quiet in him, a loneliness that even the crown could not fill. For weeks, perhaps months, he had been plagued by dreams, or were they visions? In the dreams, a woman called to him from darkness. Her voice was a whisper at first, barely audible, but it carried urgency and longing. Each night, the visions grew stronger. Her image became clearer. Her eyes, he realized, were not unlike his own, fierce, untamed, and full of quiet sorrow. He could not explain why he obeyed the pull. Kings were not guided by instinct. They were guided by strategy, by duty. Yet, every instinct within him screamed that this woman beneath the hall was tied to the fate of his kingdom, and, perhaps, to him personally. The servants of the palace whispered of madness when he refused counsel advice, when he wandered into the shadowed corridors, listening to walls, tracing the ancient stones with his hands. "The king is haunted," they murmured, "haunted by shadows of the past." But the Alpha King did not hear them. He heard only the call of the darkness. He descended the spiral staircase that led to the underground chambers. Torches flickered weakly, their flames bending away from something unseen. The deeper he went, the colder it became. The air thickened, carrying the scent of earth and a faint trace of something sweet, almost floral, like a memory of a garden long destroyed. He paused at a stone door, covered in strange markings. The runes glowed faintly, as if recognizing him. He placed his hand upon the door, feeling a thrum beneath the stone, a pulse that matched his own heartbeat. This was the barrier holding her, the invisible chains that had kept her from the world above. Beneath the stone, the woman felt the vibrations. Her heart, or what she could call a heart, stirred. She reached out, though she could not move, her fingers brushing against the edge of the magic that separated them. Warmth spread through her chest, like sunlight breaking through endless clouds. The Alpha King spoke, though his voice was soft, almost reverent. "I know you are there. he said. "I have come because I must." The words were not heard with ears, but with the soul. She responded, not with words, but with a sensation, an answering current, trembling with fear, hope, and something else she could not name. He felt it too, a tug at his core, a recognition older than the palace itself. As he pressed his hand against the runes, the shadows around him stirred. Whispers rose from the walls, voices speaking in tongues long forgotten. He did not flinch. He did not falter. He pressed forward, guided by instinct and an unwavering certainty. The woman sensed it now. The seal was weakening. Every pulse of his presence loosened the ancient bindings, and with it, the memories she had long buried began to surface. Faces she remembered, faces of kings and queens, allies and betrayers flashed through her mind. She realized that her imprisonment had not been random. She had been a threat once. Someone who knew too much, who wielded power that could challenge even kings. Her instincts screamed caution. Yet, a strange trust blossomed. She could not see him, yet she knew he was not like the others. He carried authority, yes, but he also carried understanding. And something deeper, a willingness to see her as she truly was, not as the world feared her to be. The king murmured again, "I will not harm you. Whatever chains hold you, I will break them." And in the silence, she felt it. The first fracture. In the darkness, a spark of light flared along the magical seal, illuminating faint outlines of the ancient runes. The shadows twisted, resisting, but the king's presence was a force they could not oppose. Through the faint light, she glimpsed him, not with eyes, but with essence. A figure of power, of command, yet softened by something rare, empathy. She felt a tremor of hope, dangerous as it was intoxicating. Hope had been a foreign feeling for so long, but now it coiled around her like a living thing. The palace itself seemed to respond to his arrival. The air vibrated. Dust fell from the ceilings. The torches flared higher, casting flickering light on the stone. For the first time in what felt like centuries, the woman felt the possibility of freedom. Yet, freedom was never simple. Magic like hers or hers, and the palaces combined, never yielded without challenge. As the king pressed closer, the shadows deepened. Shapes formed in the dark, half-formed and threatening, echoing the woman's long-buried fears. They were not alive in the sense of men or women, but they were alive in memory and resentment, guardians of a secret that had been sealed for a reason. She shivered at the presence of these shadows, and the king felt it too. He did not hesitate. "I will not run from you," he said, voice unwavering. "Show yourself." The shadows recoiled at his command, bowing to a force they could not resist. The seal groaned under the pressure of ancient magic undone. A single, silvery crack appeared along the stone barrier. The woman felt it like a sigh, escaping centuries of suffocation. Her mind raced. Freedom was within reach, but what would it mean? Could she trust this man who had been summoned not by chance, but by instinct? Could she allow herself to emerge into a world that had once betrayed her? The king's instincts flared once more. A current of certainty. "I will not fail you," he whispered. He placed both hands on the stone, and the light of his determination seemed to burn through the shadows themselves. The woman felt it, a trembling in the very core of her being. A pulse of connection, deep and primal, tied her to him. She had never felt it before. A bond formed not by chains or magic, but by recognition. Somehow, she knew he was the key to her release, the force capable of unlocking the darkness that had imprisoned her. And then, a voice rose from the shadows. Not hers, not his, but something older, ancient, and filled with warning. "Heed the cost," it whispered. Heed the price. The king did not falter. His eyes burned with resolve. I heed nothing but what is right, he said. The cracks in the seal widened. Light poured into the chamber, washing over the woman in a warm glow she had not felt in ages. The shadows writhed and twisted, reluctant to yield, but the king's presence held them at bay. Her hand, the one trapped beneath centuries of darkness, trembled as it reached toward the light. She could feel the world above her, hear the faint hum of life, and sense the presence of someone who would not leave her to the shadows. And then, with a sound like the tearing of stone and the sighing of ages, the first fragment of the seal shattered. A beam of light pierced the chamber, and for the first time, she saw the Alpha King not just with instinct, but with her eyes, reflected in the shard of light. Their gazes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, longing, and the promise of a bond neither fully understood. The chamber shivered with residual magic. Dust and faint motes of light swirled around them. The woman, still trembling, knew her freedom was near. Yet she also understood the danger that still lingered. The Alpha King, his hand steady on the broken seal, whispered, "You are not alone. I am here." And in that moment, beneath the grand hall of Eltheria, the darkness seemed to pause, waiting to see if two souls, guided by instinct and bound by fate, could defy centuries of magic and shadow. The first step of her journey from darkness had begun, and the king knew, in the marrow of his bones, that the events to come would change them both, and perhaps the entire kingdom forever. Cliffhanger. As the final pieces of the seal fell away, a low rumble echoed through the palace. The shadows stirred violently, not vanishing, but gathering strength. Something ancient, something tied to her past, was awakening, and it was coming for them both. The woman's eyes met the king's, wide with alarm and awe. "It is not finished," she whispered, and the Alpha King nodded, instincts roaring. They had only begun to face the darkness. The seal lay shattered beneath the grand hall, yet the chamber was not silent. Shadows stirred like living water, twisting into shapes that whispered of old fears and ancient grudges. The air was thick with magic, humming with energy that had waited centuries to be released. The woman, once buried in darkness, stepped carefully from the remnants of her prison, her bare feet brushing against the cold, damp stone. She had no name, or rather, the names she had carried were like leaves blown away by wind. All she had now was herself, her memories flickering like dying stars, and the sudden, overwhelming presence of the Alpha King. He stood nearby, armor dark and polished, eyes fixed on her with a mixture of awe and caution. His instincts told him she was both fragile and formidable, a danger and a promise all at once. For a moment, they merely looked at each other. Words were not needed. Centuries of silence, centuries of shadow, had been broken by a single touch of courage. "I am here," he said softly, his voice steady, though the echoes of the chamber made it sound as if the walls themselves were speaking. "You are free." She studied him carefully, her gaze traveling over his broad shoulders, the runes etched into his armor, the quiet intensity in his eyes. Freedom was a strange sensation. She had never thought she would feel it again. Yet even as she breathed the cold, musty air, a tremor ran through her chest. The shadows were not gone. They lingered, restless, waiting to remind her that freedom always demanded a price. "What happens now?" she asked, voice barely more than a whisper. It sounded alien even to her own ears, soft and uncertain. The Alpha King stepped closer, his presence both protective and commanding. "We face what must be faced," he said. "Whatever force binds you, whatever curse keeps you hidden, it is not finished. I can feel it." She nodded, understanding without needing explanation. The magic that had imprisoned her had not been passive. It was alive, as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. And now that she was free, its attention would turn toward her, testing the limits of her strength. They moved together through the labyrinth beneath the palace, the walls alive with faint runes and magical sigils. The shadows twisted and writhed as they passed, reaching for her, but the king's presence kept them at bay. Even so, the tension was palpable. Every step forward seemed to awaken something deeper, darker, and older than either of them could name. She paused near a pool of still water in a cavern illuminated by a faint, otherworldly glow. Her reflection shimmered and fractured. In the ripples, she saw glimpses of her past, a crown she had never worn, a throne she had never claimed, and faces that betrayed her trust. "I remember fragments," she whispered. "Faces, names, promises broken long ago. I was meant to lead, but they buried me before I could." The king placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "You were hidden because they feared you," he said, "because you could change everything. But I will not hide from you. I will not fear you. I see you." Their eyes met, and in that gaze was a bond forged not by choice, but by fate. Something instinctive stirred between them, a connection that defied words, defied time, defied even the shadows themselves. She felt warmth, a strange comfort in the midst of lingering darkness, and he felt a stirring in his chest, a recognition he could not fully name. They pressed deeper into the caverns, guided by faint magical traces she could feel, remnants of the seal that had held her captive. As they moved, she began to notice the subtle ways her powers dormant for so long were awakening. A faint shimmer of light would flare from her hands when she touched the walls. Her voice, soft at first, carried weight, echoing through the tunnels and disturbing the lingering shadows. "Your magic," the king said, eyes narrowing. "It is strong, stronger than I imagined, but it is unsettled." "Yes," she admitted, "I can feel it. It wants to protect me, but it does not know me yet. It is wild, like a storm waiting to break." The king nodded. "Then we must learn together." His tone was gentle, yet carried the authority of a ruler accustomed to command. "I will not let anything harm you. I will guide you through this storm." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she believed him. The shadows that had once haunted her seemed to recoil slightly, sensing the strength of their bond, even as the deeper darkness stirred beneath. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time seemed fractured in the underworld of the palace. Every corner they turned, every passage they followed, whispered of the past, of betrayal, of magic that had long been forgotten. At last, they reached a chamber larger than the hall above. Its walls were etched with symbols that glowed faintly, reacting to her presence. As she stepped forward, the light intensified, illuminating her face, and for the first time, the king saw her fully, not as a shadow, not as a whisper, but as a woman of strength, intelligence, and quiet defiance. "You are more than I imagined," he said, "more than any story could have told me." She felt the weight of his words, and something inside her shifted. Centuries of fear, of silence, of shadows pressing against her heart, began to lift. For the first time, she felt not only free, but seen. Yet the relief was brief. From the far corners of the chamber, a movement caught her attention. Shadows, darker and more solid than before, began to coalesce. They moved with purpose, forming shapes that were neither human nor entirely magical. Eyes glinted from the darkness, and a low hum filled the air, a vibration that made the stone walls shiver. "They come," she whispered. "The curse. It is not gone. It knows I am awake." The king drew his sword, the blade catching the faint glow of the chamber. "Then, we face it together," he said. His voice was calm, resolute, yet beneath it ran a current of emotion he did not attempt to hide. The shadows lunged, not with violence, but with intent, probing and testing. She could feel their whispers pressing against her mind, trying to tempt her, to frighten her, to remind her of centuries of captivity. She faltered for a moment, but the king's hand gripped hers, grounding her. "Do not fear," he said. "I am here. Trust me." With his touch, a surge of energy coursed through her. Her powers flared, reacting not with aggression, but with harmony. Light spilled from her fingertips, pushing back the shadows, illuminating the chamber with a brilliance that had not been seen in centuries. For a fleeting moment, they stood together in the center of the chamber, light and shadow battling around them. She realized then that her strength alone was not enough. It was their connection, their trust, that allowed her powers to flourish without consuming them both. "Together," she said, her voice firmer now. "We are stronger, together." He nodded, and in that affirmation, something unspoken passed between them. A promise, a recognition, a bond that defied explanation. The shadows hissed and recoiled, but they did not vanish. Something deeper, something older, had been awakened. They moved toward the heart of the chamber, where the runes were brightest. Here, the magic was ancient, tied not only to her imprisonment, but to the very fate of the kingdom. The king sensed it in his bones. If they failed here, the consequences would ripple through every corner of Altheria. She stepped forward, her powers responding to her will, tracing patterns in the air, illuminating runes that had lain dormant. Each symbol that glowed seemed to whisper secrets, long buried and almost forgotten. She felt herself growing stronger, more certain, more alive. Yet the king could feel the pull of something hidden, something watching. The air thickened, and a chill ran down his spine. The shadows had not been entirely vanquished. They were gathering, coalescing around the edges of the chamber, waiting for the moment to strike. "They are not done," he said. "Whatever is bound to you, it knows you are awake, and it is angry." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words. Fear lingered, but it was tempered by the strange warmth of his presence. She had been alone for so long, but now she was not. She had a guide, a protector, and something else, something deeper, though neither dared to name it yet. "Then we prepare," she said. "We face them together. I will not be trapped again." The king's gaze softened. "And I will not leave your side," he said. "No matter the cost." The chamber trembled as the shadows stirred more violently. Whispers rose into a chorus of warning, echoes of betrayal and lost power. The woman stepped closer to the center of the runes, her hands raised, summoning her strength. The king remained at her side, sword in hand, instincts sharp, ready to defend her from threats seen and unseen. And then, from the darkness, a form began to emerge. Not entirely human, not entirely magical. It glimmered with the residue of ancient curses and long-forgotten rage. Its presence was commanding, terrifying, yet familiar, as if it had known her once and had waited centuries for this moment. She froze, heart pounding, as recognition flared in her mind. This force, this shadow, was tied to her past, to the life she had lost, to the betrayal that had buried her in darkness. The king tightened his grip on her hand, and she felt the surge of courage he offered. "We face it," he said, voice steady, though tension threaded through it. "Together." And in that instant, the chamber held its breath. Light and shadow, power and destiny, love and fear, all converged. The battle for her freedom, for the kingdom, and for their bond was only beginning. Cliffhanger. The shadow spoke in a voice that echoed through the stone walls, carrying centuries of anger. "You should not have come." The woman's eyes widened in recognition, and the king instinctively stepped forward, ready to face whatever ancient force had awakened. Darkness swirled, and the first strike of their test began. Their journey into peril, power, and a bond that could not be broken had truly begun. The shadows had gathered, swirling like living smoke around the cavern beneath the grand hall. They were neither wholly human nor fully magical, but remnants of ancient curses, fueled by centuries of betrayal and malice. The woman stood at the center of the chamber, her hands raised, summoning her powers with a clarity and confidence she had never known before. Light spilled from her fingers, illuminating every rune, every crack in the stone, every lingering specter of darkness. The Alpha King remained at her side, sword in hand, instincts taut. He had learned to trust not only his own power, but the force that surged from her. Together, they were a balance of instinct and magic, of strength and empathy. The shadow moved first, a shape that shimmered with anger and memory. "You should not have awakened," it said, its voice like grinding stone, echoing through the chamber. "You belong beneath the earth, forgotten, buried, silent." "I am no longer buried," she said, voice steady, clear. The light around her pulsed with energy, reacting to her words. "I am awake. I am here. And I will not be silenced." The shadow hissed, coiling and twisting, forming tendrils that lashed toward her. But the king stepped forward, positioning himself between her and the darkness. His sword cut through the shadows, dispersing them like mist in the morning sun. Yet the force was relentless, responding not to brute strength alone but to old magic and emotion, tied to her very being. "Do not fight it alone," he said, eyes locked on hers. "We are stronger together. Trust me." Her heart thrummed at his words. She had felt alone for centuries, trapped beneath stone and magic, but now she realized that she had never truly been alone. His presence grounded her, focused her power, gave her courage to face the ancient force that sought to undo her. Together, they advanced toward the center of the chamber, where the largest rune glowed with intense energy. She traced patterns in the air, weaving light into intricate forms that countered the darkness. The shadows shrieked, curling and recoiling, yet they did not flee. This was no ordinary battle. This was a reckoning, a test of will, power, and the bond between them. "You cannot banish me," the shadow hissed. "I am part of you, your past, your fear, your pain." "Yes," she admitted, her voice unwavering. "You are part of me. But I am more than fear. I am more than the past. I am stronger than my pain. And I am not alone." The words rang out, resonating with the chamber, shaking loose centuries of magic that had long been bound to the curse. The king felt the energy radiating from her, not destructive but transformative, and he knew they were close to turning the tide. The shadow roared, striking toward her with a force that threatened to overwhelm. She faltered for a moment, but the king caught her hand. "Focus," he whispered. "We face it together." Their hands met, light intertwining with instinct, power flowing between them like a river finding its course. The shadow hesitated, sensing the unbreakable connection forming. For the first time in centuries, it felt resistance, not just from her magic, but from the bond they shared. She closed her eyes, reaching deeper into herself, into memories and emotions that had been locked away. Pain, loss, fear, all of it surged through her, yet she allowed it to flow, to strengthen her rather than weaken her. She felt the curse reacting, the shadows twisting, but the king's presence anchored her, guiding her focus. "You are not alone," he said again, voice steady, commanding. "Not now. Not ever. I will stand with you." Light burst from her hands, bright and pure, illuminating the entire chamber. The shadows shrieked and writhed, clawing at the walls, desperate to survive. But the force of her magic, combined with the king's unyielding presence, was unstoppable. The largest tendril of darkness lunged toward her. But the king stepped forward, sword raised. He did not strike with the intent to kill but with the intent to protect, to hold the line while her power surged. Together, they became a single force, light and steel, magic and instinct, bond and courage. The shadow writhed, twisting into shapes of faces she had once known, mocking, accusing, trying to pierce her resolve. Each face brought a memory, a pang of sorrow or betrayal, but she did not falter. She faced each one, acknowledged it, and let it pass, weaving light around it until it dissolved into harmless energy. And then, at the center of the chamber, the largest shadow shrank into a single form, a dark mirror of herself. It was the embodiment of her fear, her anger, her pain. Its eyes were hers, its voice hers, echoing centuries of despair. "You cannot escape me," it said. "I am all you have known." She stepped forward, her light blazing brighter than ever. "I am more than you," she said. "I am alive. I am free. And I choose life, not fear." The shadow screamed, a sound that shook the chamber, before dissolving into a cascade of harmless sparks. The remnants of darkness scattered, leaving the chamber bathed in light. She fell to her knees, exhausted but unbroken. The king knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said, voice full of awe and relief. "You faced it, and you won." She looked at him, feeling a warmth she had never known. "I could not have done it alone," she admitted. You guided me." He smiled, though faintly, a rare softness touching his eyes. "We guided each other," he said. "Together." For the first time, the chamber was silent. But not in the way it had been before. Silence now held peace. A calm after the storm. The curse had been broken. The shadows dispersed, and her powers fully awakened. Yet the king knew, as did she, that this was only the beginning of their journey. The kingdom still bore scars from centuries of magic and betrayal, and they would need to face those challenges together. The woman rose, feeling strength coursing through her veins. She was no longer the shadow buried beneath the hall. She was alive, powerful, and ready to reclaim her place in the world above. The king offered his hand, and she took it, feeling the steady reassurance of his presence. "I was afraid," she said softly. "Afraid that even free, I would be alone again." "You are not alone," he said, voice unwavering. "And you never will be." They emerged from the chamber into the halls of the palace. The torches burned brighter now, the stone walls seeming less cold and oppressive. The air felt lighter, infused with the remnants of her magic and the echo of the shadow's defeat. As they walked together, their bond deepened. It was no longer just instinct or magic, it was understanding, trust, and something even more profound, a connection that promised loyalty, protection, and perhaps, love. The courtiers and servants above had waited for centuries, or so it felt, for the curse to end. Whispers spread through the palace as the woman appeared, unbowed, unbroken, and radiant with power. The king walked beside her, not as a ruler over her, but as a companion, equal in purpose and respect. And though the palace still bore the weight of its ancient magic, something had shifted. The balance of power had changed. The kingdom would no longer fear shadows, for they had been faced and overcome, and a new era had begun. Yet even in victory, there was caution. They had seen the depth of the curse, the power of the shadows, and the fragility of the world they inhabited. The woman knew that her past might still reach out, that enemies unseen might rise, and that the bond she shared with the king would be tested in ways neither could yet imagine. But in that moment, standing side by side in the light, they allowed themselves a rare and precious peace. The woman looked at the king, her eyes reflecting gratitude, trust, and a growing affection. "Thank you," she said simply. He smiled, a small, quiet gesture that carried more than words could express. No, thank you, for trusting me, for facing everything, and for being who you are. They walked through the palace together, each step a declaration that the darkness no longer ruled them. Her powers were her own. The king's guidance had strengthened them, and together, they could face whatever the world held. As they reached the upper halls, the first rays of sunlight pierced the clouds above Eltheria. Though faint, it was enough to wash the palace in a gentle glow. The woman lifted her face, letting the light touch her features for the first time in centuries. The king watched her, instinct and emotion intertwined, knowing that this light, fragile as it was, symbolized not just the kingdom's hope, but their shared journey forward. In that quiet moment, they understood something essential. Freedom was not just the absence of chains. It was the courage to face what once bound you, and the trust to walk forward with someone who saw your true self. The kingdom had been tested. Magic and shadow had been confronted, and in the heart of the palace, two souls, bound by fate, had found redemption not just for themselves, but for the world they would now protect together.